Okay, so we're now at 16 people in the room. So since we do have a lot of things to talk, let's start. So welcome everybody, welcome all the participants. My name is I'm Mar Garcia. I'm the Secretary General of the European Green Party. I come from Barcelona, and I commute between Barcelona and Brussels. And together with Melanie Vogel, who is not joining us today, but we share responsibilities. We manage the gender network of the European Greens. This is, well, networks are structures that are very much bottom up, dynamized, but sometimes there is, also some top down push for activities. And this digital gender gap and digital feminism parallel session in the 33rd EGP Council is one of those push from the committee, because we actually believed it was a very nice topic where we haven't had yet a lot of conversation among Greens. So I believe that it's very pertinent, this session today, because we're in a political moment in which, political and societal moment in which, on the one side, we have had this terrible pandemic that has a lot of consequences in our life, but one huge consequence that has had, and this council is a proof of that, is that somehow technology has stepped into our lives in a way that we would have never thought. We all had phones with internet connection. We all used internet for our work, but more and more the aspects of our lives are being colonialized somehow by the tech world and are having an impact. And also as a consequence of this pandemic, on the other side, and after the terrible consequences in many aspects of, but also within the economic field, there is this will from the European Union to invest in revitalizing our economies, and one among others, one of the conditions that are implemented or that are within this EU recovery and resilience funds is to push forward for the digitalization. So then we were digging a bit, and it's not only us, but mainly also thanks to the work that the Green MEPs in the European Parliament are doing, and thanks to Alexander Gysi also, there has been more and more concern on the side of the Greens about how women are underrepresented in this tech world, and how there is a lot of things to watch, so that this is being minimized. We did work very much for conditionalities in these resilience funds, and we got the climate conditionality. But I have to say that also Alexandra worked, and together with the group, but she was the voice to have a gender conditionality in these funds, which we didn't have the majority, but which is actually a pity. But I'm very much hoping that we're running towards a moment in politics where this majority is going to be expanded someday, and we're going to be able to push this gender conditionality forward. And there's not going to be more public money spent without taking into account the consequences and the impacts on women. So I had some figures, but I'm not going to spend more time on this, because we do have very interesting speakers, and those are the protagonists of this workshop. So I don't want to talk much longer. But I think that I'm very happy that they accepted our invitation, and I think that we're going to have the opportunity to learn a lot. So we have three fantastic women that are going to talk about us. I'm going to be presenting each one of them as I give the floor, and then after the intervention of the three of them, we also will have the opportunity for an exchange in Q&A. So the first person that I'm going to give the floor is Ursula Hoos. She is the director of analytical, social, and economic research. Yeah. She, having retired from academia in 2021, she has been researching the economic and social impacts of technological change, the restructuring of employment, and the changing international division of labor since the 1970s, and is the editor of Work Organization, Labor and Globalization. Her most recent books, Reinventing the Welfare State, Digital Platforms and Public Policies, and Our Labor in Contemporary Capitalism, What's Next? So without any more delay, Ursula, you have the floor.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this nice invitation. It's very nice to meet you, at least virtually. And this it's a very important topic that you've chosen today. Now, I could start, as very many people do, by throwing lots and lots of statistics at you about how women are underrepresented in tech. We know, for instance, that only one ICT graduate in every 5 is a woman. We know that only for every article that is written about artificial intelligence, only 1 in 7 of the authors is a woman. And I could go on and on and on. There is lots of evidence that women are very underrepresented in the IT industry and in the IT workforce, and in the strands of education that are involved in producing digitalization. But that's not really what I want to focus on. I think for the last 30 or 40 years, when people look at gender equality, the field of vision has actually got narrower and narrower and narrower. Back in the 1970s, feminists were making very big demands about what different kind of society we wanted, looking not only at paid work, but at unpaid work, at reproductive labor and activities that go on in the community that aren't paid. And as the years have gone down, the focus has narrowed and narrowed and narrowed. So you could be forgiven if you look at most of the policy literature for the last 30 years. Women's progress is measured by how they perform in paid work. What is the gender wage gap? How many women are managers? These kinds of things. And so there's a whole of the areas of life that are outside paid work in the labour market have sort of disappeared from view. And it's in the spheres of life that are outside paid work, increasingly, that digitalization is having enormous effects on the quality of the lives, both of men and of women, but particularly on the shifting gender relations in a sort of broad social sense. So having said I won't throw you any statistics at you, I do want to show you 2 bits of recent research that I've done where we've been looking particularly on digitalization in the form of digital control of work and online platforms. So I'm now going to try and share a screen with you. Wish me luck. I'm not very good at this.
Take your time, Ursula, don't worry.
It's share. Is that coming up?
Yes.
Can you see that? Right.
Yeah.
Well, this rather, are we in the right mode here? There. This slide, it may look rather intimidating. This is a series of surveys we did right across Europe, looking at how people's work is managed digitally. And this is just one example. This is people who have to use a digital app to find out when work is available or not, and to report that the work that they do, which is typically a practice that's used by online platforms like Uber or Foodora or Deliveroo or whatever. And we did surveys, as you can see, in 13 European countries between 2016 and 2019. And as you can see, the blue bars are people who actually say they work at least once a week for an online platform. So that is quite significant in a lot of European countries. The ones in orange on these bars are the people who work more occasionally for online platforms. But the bits that are in grey are the people who don't work for online platforms, but are nevertheless digitally managed. So you can see that these new forms of digital management extend very widely across the labour market. We're not just talking about people who work for Uber. We're talking about nurses, teachers, childcare workers, all kinds of people who are now digitally managed. Now, these surveys were done between 2016 and 2019 in different countries. The only country where we did manage to run the survey twice was the UK. And this enabled us to see the growth of digital management between 2016 and 2019. And as you can see, it's really, really dramatic. It doubled, more than doubled among the people working as platform workers. This is percentages of the population. And the people who are digitally managed, who are not platform workers, that went up from nearly 10% in 2016 to 15% in 2019. So in other words, this is before the pandemic. There was a huge growth in digital management. So it's pervading the workforce very, very rapidly. That's just to give you a feel of digitalization and work. Now, the next slide, this is homing in much more precisely on, and you'll see why I focus on this later on household services. This is platforms that provide work in people's homes, which represent the kind of labour that women also do unpaid. Cleaning services, care services, and some things like, you know, cleaning windows or gardening or whatever. These are basically only services that are carried out in the home. And as you can see, the people, but the band marked in blue is the people who work for these platforms. So you can see quite a substantial portion of the population is actually working for online platforms, doing what you might call other people's housework. The bands in orange are the people who are using the platforms. So again, very high proportions of the population now, we're actually turning to platforms to find people to provide household services for us. But what's more interesting is the lines in grey at the bottom. I don't know if you can see those. And these are the people who do both, who both use other people to come and do their housework for them and work for online platforms. And this was a big surprise to me when I was doing the research, because what you'd kind of expect would be like the orange people, the people who use the platforms, are like a kind of middle class who are using a new servant class to come and do their housework for them. A lot of feminists argued that, you know, over the last 30 or 40 years, more privileged women have been able to enter the labour market in Europe and to work kind of as if they are men, to compete with men, because there's been another group of women who do their housework for them, because they have mainly migrant workers. They have somebody else who scrubs the floors and looks after the baby and, you know, takes care of the housework so that they can go out into the workforce and be like as if equal. But what this shows us, we're not talking about like a sort of a privileged group of people who are using platform workers and a new servant class who are doing the work. The new servant class are also actually almost the same number of people. 85% of the people who work in other people's homes are also using household services. And this again has grown dramatically, because in the UK, we are able to compare 2016 and 2019. So we see that it doubled. The numbers of people doing this kind of work doubled just in that 3-year period, just before the pandemic hit, which is a really dramatic social change, you know, from 2.5% to 5.5% of the population. So how do we explain this? How do we explain this extraordinary growth of the use of digital platforms to basically to do housework? And it seems to me that the only way we can explain it is by this pattern here, that we have had since the financial crisis of 2008, first of all, there have been dramatic cuts in the availability of public services. So there have been much fewer, households have been able to turn much less to the state to provide them with childcare or elder care or whatever. There was a loss of credit up until the financial crisis. People were encouraged to, if you didn't have enough money at the end of the month, you put it on your credit card. And suddenly the credit was withdrawn. There was a freeze on wages, and in many sectors, wages actually went down in real terms. So what you have was households put under this incredible financial pressure, where there are all these household services that need doing, but they actually need to work to earn the money. So you have workers who need extra income going around the circle, who work longer hours. There's a lot of evidence that people have worked longer and longer hours during this period. And most of the people who work for online platforms, 9 out of 10 of them are doing it on top of another job. So people are taking on all this extra work. So that needs less time for housework. And so what do? Something's got to give. You've got households where all the adults are working, there isn't enough time, the kids are being neglected, people are fighting about whose turn it is to go to the supermarket. There's an emotional price that's paid for this time crunch, as well as a physical price, mental illness and so on. So there's this kind of time crunch in the household. And the only way people can resolve that problem is they buy the household services in the market, and online platforms are the cheapest and easiest way to do that. So you've got a huge growth in people using the online platform. So the platforms grow, so they create more low-paid, precarious work, and more workers who need to keep on needing extra income, who then work longer hours and who are leaving less time available for housework. So we've got basically a vicious cycle which is socially destructive, economically destructive, and of course environmentally destructive as well, very often, because these online platforms tend to be global corporations who, with very long supply chains, who are not, so to speak, conserving their resources. So you just have to imagine the typical house. People are not using online platforms because it's a luxury. They're buying a meal from Deliveroo because they're just too exhausted to cook very often. These are the dynamics of the growth of online platforms. So my question is, I don't want to trespass too much into other agendas, but my question is, how do we break this vicious cycle? That seems to me the politically important question right now. And I can't see my clock. I don't know. Am I running over time?
I want to know what is your answer to this question.
Well, in that case, I'm going to do something a little bit shameless. This is what my new book. I'm just going to summarize what my new book says, which is what we can do about it. I'll go through this very, very quickly. First of all, we need a reform of the tax benefit system, because this increasing wage polarization in society is driven by a mismatch between the benefit system and the labour market, with more and more people who are not entitled to state benefits. And it seems to me that not all forms of basic income are necessarily universal or redistributive, but it seems to me that there are forms of universal basic income that can address this problem. I won't go into that. We need a reform of labour law to just give universal rights. First of all, a clear definition of self-employment, because a lot of these workers are kind of pseudo self-employed. They're called independent contractors, and they don't have any rights. There are genuine self-employed people, and they're legal status needs to be defined, and everybody else needs to be given universal rights that apply to all workers, whether they're full-time, whether they're part-time, whether they're temporary, whether they're permanent. Rights to paid holidays, rights to join a trade union, right to sick pay, right to maternity, etc. But also digital rights, the right to know what happens to your data when it's been collected by the employer, or the right to challenge an unfair customer rating and so on. Anyway, and enforcement. I won't go into enforcement, but you need an enforcement system. And this is the point where I think that there are some interesting discussions to be had at a local level. I think the digital technologies can be used for public good. And I think what we need to do is to be very creative, thinking about how digital technologies can be used at a local level to build sustainable and equal communities, particularly to provide social reproductive services directly to local people who need them, like care services, cleaning services, etc. But also to develop local food distribution policies that match supply and demand in a much less wasteful way, and bring in local suppliers as a way to develop local food policies, and as a way to develop local transport policies, particularly. Like if you had like a public Uber that was linked to local bus services, local public transport services, you could actually, and you made that affordable and you made it suitable, and you used electric vehicles that were adapted for transporting children and disabled people and so on, you could actually get private cars off the road altogether. If there was a really good public taxi services that was integrated with public transport, I believe people would use it, and I think that would do more to get rid of private cars than almost any other single measure. And we can go on and on, but there are lots of ways, it seems to me, that these technologies can be used digitally. So in other words, I'm sure I'm going over time, so I'll just give you my last bullet point. What we need is a welfare state that first is redistributive from employers, from the rich to the poor, that provides a universal safety net for all citizens, that provides employment rights for all workers, uses digital technologies to provide social reproductive services to all who need them, thus going back to some of those demands that feminists were making a half a century ago about public services that really liberate women from housework, and that use digital technologies to provide sustainable and locally based transport, food distribution, and waste management policies. So that's it. Sorry to speak for so long.
Super. Thank you, Ursula, for a very interesting perspective and for pointing out how important this local level is. We can discuss that afterwards, because a lot of the answers are also about, bringing things and, putting the local perspective more into the center when taking political decisions. But the next speaker that we have with us is Laura Sophie Dornheim. Sorry about my German pronunciation. She's a candidate for the German Bundestag and speaker of the Berlin Greens Working Group on Digital. So someone that knows a lot about. She's a digital policy expert. Laura studied business informatics and received a PhD in gender studies. She has almost 20 years of experience in the digital sector, professionally as well as politically. She's advocating for a more fair and inclusive tech sector. So Laura, after Ursula has given us this picture, from a green perspective, what would you say that we need to address this challenge that Ursula put on the table?
First of all, thank you for the introduction. Your question is a rather big one. What do we need to address? I guess we could fill not just one session, but probably several days to. So let me try to condensate it in 10 minutes. So when I think about it's not just an intersection, the overall feminism, right? I always try to, or like find it easy to structure it into borrowing some tech terms. I want to look at the back end and the front end. The back end tech industry where technology.
Lara, sometimes your mic is moving and there is a lapse of seconds that we don't hear you.
Yeah, we had that with the German internet. Let me kill some other applications and hope that that helps.
Super, thank you. And sorry for interrupting.
Well, would be a waste of all our time if you cannot hear me. Okay, there should basically be nothing else running now. If it breaks up again, let me know and then I'll just turn off my video. So, okay. So I'll try to give an overview from my and the green standpoint in about 10 minutes. And I'm trying to structure it, borrowing some tech terms, looking at the back end and the front end. The back end being the whole tech industry where technology is developed and made, and the front end, the use of technology. A lot of that topics that Ursula already has pointed to. Of course, the question who creates technology heavily influences, impacts how technology is perceived, used, by whom, for whom it is does. So there is a direct causality. But if we say, okay, let's focus only on, we have a equal gender balance and hopefully also more diversity included in the teams that create these technologies for today and tomorrow, then we would have to wait a quite long time, right? I mean, I studied informatics like 15 years ago now, and the ratio of men and women hasn't gone up much. And still today in Europe, even those with a technical degree have a 30% increased chance, women, of leaving the industry again. So we have a problem all along the pipeline. So while it's really important to look at that, we cannot only focus on that. But still, there is a lot that we can and must do to improve the situation in the back end. So first of all, of course, the underlying issue is gender stereotypes that still exists. I think they, in some areas, they've gotten even worse in the last couple of years. There's a big rollback. And there is effects negatively impacting the push for equality, such like gender marketing, you know, like gendered kinder surprise eggs and all this BS, excuse me, but that is definitely not helping. So it's really hard to target that with laws, though I would totally be a fan of like completely prohibiting any gendered marketing. But if we, for example, look at school books, we can make sure that no country, no region, no state buys literature for education where there's different math examples for boys and girls. Because yeah, this is, I don't think I need to explain anyone why this is hugely offensive. And then if we look at the tech industry, women receive about 2% of the venture capital worldwide. That's ridiculous. And while it's harder and more difficult to regulate the free market, the private sector, we do have a huge lever at hand when giving out public money. The EU gives a lot of different grants for startup, for tech projects, for research projects, and I'm still shocked, and I cannot understand why we have a European Union that has gender equality as one of its universally agreed principles. But then if we give away money, I was a judge for a Horizon 2020 project a few years ago. Diversity of the teams is not even a criteria. Like nobody even looks at it. So that's just such a blind spot. It's like blinder than blind, I don't know. So that is something where we really need to, where it would be relatively easy to address that issue. Mar, you mentioned that in the introduction, that of course this also should apply to other spendings, to now, for example, the post-COVID recovery funds, where Alexander Geze made a huge effort to make sure that this is not just, again, benefiting men, but benefiting women equally. So yeah, there are several levers that one could take on a political level, and one should. Lastly, to improve the situation in the industry, what I think is always important is really featuring role models. It's something that's very easily done. Of course, it won't change the whole industry overnight, but it definitely helps to correct the public view of that industry, to just really show that, yes, it is still very male dominated and we need to do something about it, but there are a lot of very passionate, very knowledgeable women also creating technology in Europe. With that, let me switch to the front end. So how technology is being used in our society. Ursula also made it very clear that it's an overall topic, and I mean the times are long gone since anyone thought that tech was something for men. I mean, all of us have a smartphone in our pockets. But coming from an intersectional feminist perspective, I think what really need to make sure is that technology is accessible for all. And that starts at a very low level. If in a lot of European countries, broadband internet access is too expensive, or just technology not available for a lot of people, we exclude a lot of people. And that is not, that's not compatible with my feminism. So that is something that really needs to be tackled. The German Greens have proposed a law. I mean, we're like before the election, or until the election, we're the smallest opposition party, which will hopefully change. But we do have a draft for a law making broadband internet access a universal right, basically, to make sure it is available and affordable for everyone. With that comes, of course, that technology must be inclusive, must be usable for all, that it must be non-discriminatory. That also is a huge field, but I just want to point to one example. I mean, artificial intelligence is a debated term, but it's the one that kind of like, is mostly used to debate machine learning and a lot of algorithmic decision making. And we all know a lot of examples how that can go wrong, right? Amazon with their hiring process, when they surprisingly found out their algorithm discriminates against women. Like, how could that happen if we only feed it with Amazon data where we know that they have a problem with discrimination against women? And then a couple, I think like last or 2 years ago, Apple's credit cards that gave less credit to women. A lot of image recognition software that had huge trouble recognizing Black women, especially. And what I think is the biggest problem here is that we only look at it after the damage is done. And I think we need to get ahead of it, ahead of the process, and not only seek to regulate software that obviously is discriminating. I mean, we have all the laws we need for that, right? Because discrimination is by law not acceptable. But what I really would wish for the Greens all over Europe to get in a mindset where we try to shape this technology, where we're not just looking at, okay, how can we harness and mitigate risk, but how can we really ensure that such technology is created in a way that supports our vision of a inclusive, of a fair, of a just, and maybe a less commercial or less capitalist society at least. Defining criteria for how good algorithmic decision-making software can be developed. That would be, for example, that's something that I'm really looking into, because I think this would be a huge milestone, not just saying like, okay, this and this cannot be the outcome, but saying this is how we want it to look. Excuse me, I'm a bit short of breath because I'm expecting my second child in any day now, and there's just not a lot of room for air in my belly anymore. So just talking.
Don't worry, Laura, don't worry at all.
Yeah, just if you're wondering, like, why is she breathing like that? To maybe end on a positive note, I want to give you one example. What Ursula has pointed out, I would sum up under civic tech, and the civic tech scene in Europe is quite vivid. I think it's maybe a bit more active and also more recognized already in the States, but there are a lot of like smaller collective networks that aim to develop technology exactly for the people on a non-commercial, with a non-commercial approach, using open data, working open source. And in Germany, there is a rather small, but at least there is a fund existing to support such projects. And one project I really love is by a collective called Bloody Health. They're developing a open source, extremely privacy sensitive period app, because that is also one of the examples. There's so many period apps out there, lots with like pink butterflies and stuff. And a lot of them are making questionable use of the collected data, and it's super sensitive health data, right? So it just shouldn't be in anyone's hand. And so there's this team of hackers, nerds, designers in Berlin that started this open source app. And this is something that I feel as a party we should promote more, and we should make sure there's more resources available for projects like this to really try to roll back a bit the extreme commercialization and capitalist use of the internet. Because if I look at the fundamental idea of the internet, it was, not sure if I would call it anarchistic, but it was one of with huge visions and utopia of like connecting people and like enabling a more freer society where everyone could create and where everyone could benefit, and not just, you wouldn't have to pay everything with your private data or money. And that is, that's the idea I want to still keep as the utopia, and see how we can get back there a little bit. That would be my my quick overview of what needs to be done and what we can do. Really the main focus should be as Greens. I'm not sure how it's all over Europe, but definitely within Germany, we still have a lot of, or some people who think that there's a contradiction between like nature and technology. So technology is always seen as something very, seen very skeptical. I think we need to abandon this idea and really embrace technology and design it, like I said, for our idea and vision of a society. Thank you.
Super. Thank you very much, Laura, for this input and also this positive note. And maybe picking up on this, we should embrace technology without fear. And sometimes when we are not super knowledgeable about something, we kind of face it with fear. And in order to combat this fear or these, I don't know, and so I don't question, I don't know how to face it, I'm going to present the next speaker, and it's someone that is combating by educating us this fear. Yeah, so it's Annika Ojala, and she's the Rights and Democracy campaigner from the Green Group in the European Parliament, so the Greens EFA group. Annika is an international human rights advocate and expert on gender equality, LGBTIQ+ right, and non-discrimination in the digital world. She coordinates two campaigns from the Greens EFA, who she's going to explain us now. One calling for a ban on biometric mass surveillance in public spaces in the European Union, and another one advocating for a European free from gender-based violence. She was born in Helsinki, but she currently lives in Brussels with her Alaskan Malamute Rahua. So Annika, explain us what are the Greens campaigning in this field about?
Thanks so much, Mar. Thank you, Ursula and Laura. It was really great listening to you. I feel like it feels like a special kind of feminist roundtable session, which I think we all miss a lot. Like I know personally, coming together at the EGP Council and having these gender network sessions has always been a great place for me. I will tell you a little bit on how I got where I am now and what we're doing at the Parliament. But yeah, just wanted to thank you for this opportunity to come and present the campaign and to be able to listen to our phenomenal speakers on what is my favorite topic in the whole world. So how do we bring feminism in safer spaces also online, as the world is changing, and we all know that it's not anything that's excluded from our lives anymore. It's not a separate place. It's a reality that we occupy on a day-to-day basis. And where we are sitting today, not around a nice round table somewhere in a beautiful European city. We're all in front of our devices. And yeah, just to mention on the dog, if you see a big dog sneaking in the background, this is a life. I don't have the baby, I have the dog. So if there's a big wolf-looking dog sneaking behind me, I apologize in advance. But so yeah, briefly about my story and how I got here and why I'm here to present this is I was working for the Greens in Finland for quite some years, coordinating the women's wing, so working on gender equality, feminist politics, and women's political participation. And throughout that journey, it was a phenomenal journey. You may have known or heard about the victories that we were able to achieve in Finland when it comes to women's political participation and their rise to the top of government. These were phenomenal moments and experiences on a feminist journey together. But also during these years, I realized that it's not enough to get the women elected there. We have to make sure that they can thrive and they can do their job safely from violence and harassment, because we all know this is a massive, massive problem, violence against women in politics, as well as activist women, journalist women, but specifically the violence that women in politics face on their way to positions of power. So this was something I got very interested on, and I actually worked on a project with Google and European Women's Lobby looking at this project and grew kind of more and more interested in this topic. And now, as of last year, I'm super delighted to be in Brussels working with the Greens EFA group, so the Green group in the European Parliament, specifically working on digital topics, human rights, and from a gender equality and intersectional feminist perspective. I'm just going to mention a few things related to gender-based violence, and whenever I speak about this phenomenon, I want to make sure that you all know like a content warning in a way. We might talk about things that might feel uncomfortable or that are sensitive. So if at any point you feel like you don't feel comfortable in this session, you can always mute me or you know, take a deep breath. I want to be cautious of this every time I speak about violence, because I all know that every single room we ever walk into, there are always people who have overcome and survived violence. So just wanted to be respectful of that, and I'm not taking it personally if I see you mute me or if I see you leave the session. I absolutely understand and will not take it personally. So when we talk about gender-based violence as the campaign that I'm coordinating, our main objective is to get an EU law, so an EU directive on gender-based violence. Many people are surprised when they find out that there is no such directive. Gender-based violence has no umbrella protection, or people around Europe who are victims of gender-based violence do not have equal rights. And then we want to address this by harmonizing the protection. So it should not matter which city or country you live in, whether you live in a town or in a rural area, you should still have access to a life without violence. And if you do are faced with gender-based violence, you should have access to justice and restoration and protection, no matter where you are in the EU. So understanding also the scope of this phenomenon and why this campaign is extremely timely is because we know that what the UN calls the shadow pandemic in gender-based violence has risen now under COVID lockdown measures. We know that many people are struggling more and more with violence. The numbers are horrific. They are absolutely unacceptable. We know that hotlines are swamped. Women are too afraid to access safe houses. There are not enough adequate services for people who want to flee their homes and their residences. People with disabilities don't have adequate supports, for instance, to have accessible safe houses or support services. And one of the rates or the types of violence that had also risen is obviously cyber violence, because we know that the spaces that we occupy, gender-based violence does not only take place in the home, it takes place on LinkedIn, it takes place on Twitter, it takes place in all these spaces that we occupy when we're connecting and working. New phenomena have emerged, such as Zoom bombing, people attacking Zoom calls, hacking in women's meetings. For instance, feminist organizations have shared experiences of having confidential meetings on promoting gender equality, and these trolling accounts and misogynist attacks take place where they do non-consensual image sharing. They do very graphic pornographic images are shared on these meetings. So this new face of an old enemy, as we call it, has emerged, and it is affecting women and gender diverse people in very, very, very high proportions at the moment. So we feel like now is the time. We know that the European Commission is preparing a proposal for a directive, but we, as the Greens might have guessed, are very ambitious in terms of what should be in it. We do not want to have a lukewarm proposal which is not fit for the digital age. And this is why I'm so happy to be here with you today, also to look at gender-based violence and address cyber violence also as a form of gender-based violence, to understand the fact that it is here and it is not going to go away unless we have adequate protection and rights to seek justice if we are confronted with it, because the impact that it can have is one that we do not want to see as the Greens. The self-censorship that women and girls already, according to statistics, share and are telling us that they refuse or don't want to take place in political conversations online. For instance, they feel afraid of sharing and taking part in conversations online because of the fear of violence. And this is not a world that we want to live in. The many different types of gender-based violence online we know are as diverse and as horrible as we can imagine as gender-based violence outside the digital sphere. But we know that there's a very worrisome trend also, that there's new types and new ways of gender-based violence which are emerging all the time. And if we don't have enough protection at the EU level, we can all imagine what kind of world it will be like when we live in smart homes where you can be locked in, where your stalker, your perpetrator can lock you in your house. The possibilities of where this can go can be very, very, very scary and worrisome, and some of them are already here today. So we would need to make sure that the proposal that the Commission is going to go public with at the end of the year is going to be ambitious. It's also going to address gender-based violence from an intersectional perspective, also take into consideration the diversity of all women, but also gender diverse people. How can we make sure that this phenomenon, which affects people in their diversity, also is not one that is outdated, but one that is fit for the digital age, one that is fit for the world that we live in now and understands the different intersectional forms of oppression that we live in. I think I'm going over time as well, so I'm going to maybe close here, but I'm very excited to be here with you today and answer any questions you might have on the campaign and how you can join and how you can help us in bridging and building the road ahead towards a better EU level protection on gender-based violence.
Thank you, Annika. Thank you for your work in the European Parliament. Thank you for also educating the internet with also these perspectives that are not always so much well known. I see that Laura has something to add. So of course, feel free. I mean, this is a conversation within friends. So please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Annika, for bringing this ugly but hugely important topic here. Unfortunately, I have to say I do not know any women active in politics who has not received rape, death, violence threats yet. What I wanted to point out to maybe connect Ursula's mind, your input, is that commercial platforms play a big role in the rise of hate speech, digital violence, because they directly profit from it and profit in a very monetary way. As most social media platforms are funded by an ad-based business model, all the content that steers interaction, that steers scandalism, voyeurism, anything, every view on a hateful, ugly post makes them money. So I think this is something really important to keep in mind when we talk about regulating these large corporations, which is right now in process with the Digital Service Act and Digital Markets Act. And I am also, from a feminist perspective, hugely grateful that there are a few politicians from the Greens, but also from the Social Democrats, pushing for a regulation, if not a ban, of targeted advertising, personalized advertising, because that could hugely help. Yeah, that's just wanted to add that.
Very important addition, of course. Thank you very much. So I think that we have a lot of elements on the table, and I would now like open the floor for the participants to raise up their hands and to ask to our three speakers whatever they believe that they can give some. I already have my own questions, but I would like to first open the floor to some of you. We also have diversity within us, of age at least. So I'm sure there is a lot of different perspectives that we could explore on this. So don't feel ashamed. Yeah, this is a very nice environment. We are among friends. I don't think none of us are experts on the issue, except for the speakers, yeah. So don't feel afraid of asking. There is no questions that are not suitable or anything. There's not such a thing. So Annika, go for it.
Yeah, sorry, the mute button was hiding. I just wanted to come back to the phenomenon of violence against women. I know that we who are joining this council are often women who are involved in politics or active in politics. And this is definitely one of my favorite topics in the world, because I see, personally, I came into politics and working in the political sector as someone who comes from the human rights front and from the civil society. And I know that this phenomenon of silencing, aggression, threats, gender threats and sexism also affects many women who are activists, human rights defenders, environmental activists. So I see the overlap in both these spheres. I've actually also worked with the OSCE and their gender unit, looking at this phenomenon of violence against women in politics, or women who are interested in politics, but who are already silenced and denied the access of entering politics. And I know that they're doing a lot of really good work on this topic also, because they see it as a huge threat to democracy. So only also understanding this, and according to, I think it was the Interparliamentary Union's research a few years ago, where they looked at this phenomenon, it was over 80% of women in politics who answered this survey who told that they have received psychological threats. So any kind of intimidation, the forms of violence against women in politics can be very varied, but I just want to challenge all of you on this call to think, what other profession would this be acceptable in? So if we looked at plumbers, if we looked at, I mean, teachers and doctors, for instance, also face much harassment, but they also have protection from the unions and they have different protocols. But imagine harassing or insulting the sexism that we have to deal with. If you would tell that to a police officer, that would not be accepted. So the argument of saying that politicians who are public officials and they have to deal with it, they have to grow a thicker skin, I believe is completely invalid. So I also feel like this is a very important topic that will help if we can act on this now together and have better protection to just make sure that everybody has the right to be active in politics and to do politics safely. And once they access positions of political power, they can also stay there and they will not be intimidated or worn out by the threats and then the horrific violence that we have to endure. I feel like we need to have that safety and that guarantee so our democracies can do better and we can make better decisions for the climate, for the societies, and for the well-being of the people we're supposed to represent.
Thank you, Nika, very much for bringing this perspective from a politician. I think that's something that Sophie also wrote in the chat, but I'm happy that she rose her hand and maybe wants to share with us early. Sophie.
Hi. Yeah, I'm so happy that Laura and Annika brought out the question of what we have to endure as women politicians and being Greens. I think people have some kind of ideal that we will not defend ourselves and we're not capable of answering and hold our grounds. But at least there is something that I would ask for, in case you still have some resources within the European Party, the Green, because we don't have the resources in the French Green Party to organize this, would be a regular meeting or a resource platform where the new women and girls who want to engage or become activists with us and try the political path and hear about those threats and how we, I don't know, with the experience of others, could create a common defense system. That's my question in the chat. I discovered this last winter. We had I would say a group attack from the extreme right, and the French police couldn't go further because the attack was on our mailbox, but from a platform that is anonymized. So the French police didn't have the resources to go further and find the perpetrator, but it was indeed threats of rape on us, on our daughters, as usual, very sexist. And it came after that we gave some support to some anti-racism march in France. Black Lives Matter. I'm half Asian on top of it, so the Asian hate came into Europe slowly but strongly. So it's like 3-4 factors together: being a woman, being online, being an activist for transition, being so not white, so to say, or not recognized as the. This is a lot to take, and sometimes I feel I'm a little bit helpless to tell the younger generation to come, and it's going to be fine. You know, my voice is trembling. All those threats, especially the private threats at home, on our mailbox, to our family, started, you know, making us feel that indeed we are brave, but at some stage I'm gonna be stopped by this. I will, if I feel that I'm alone, and of course my party will support me, but it's not good enough, I will stop to protect my family and my privacy. So indeed, if at some stage we want to stay together and build in something like, yeah, a common mutualized system would be really nice.
Super. Thank you very much, Sophie. And also thank you, Laura, for writing that also the German Greens have this figure. I think this is something we could kind of explore and also build as a community to have this figure in other parties, yeah, because I'm not sure that other parties do have it. So I'm taking the commitment here to also explore this figure about the German grids, and thank you very much, because this is a very nice bottom-up input. So and we're going to steer that from the network and to see if we could implement this. Just one comment, because yeah, a lot of people would say, oh, you need to stay strong and, you know, and resist. But this is not about staying strong. This is about building structures that protect us and institutional measures, because that's what welfare means, that where states are for. So it's not about us individual women, you know, being very strong and, you know, no, this is about creating the institutional structures that protect individuals and us as women against all this. So thank you, that was very nice. So Annika, you want to also react? Please feel free.
Very quickly, I don't want to take too much space. I know we have many other speakers on this call. Just two things. So when I worked for the Green Party in Finland, we were the first party in the country to introduce internal mechanisms on gender-based violence online faced towards women in politics. So I actually wrote this whole manual, and we did like an internal process on who to contact and a big campaign about that. So there will be very, very good contacts for you in Finland if you're interested in this, and you don't have to like reinvent the wheel. We've done this because parties also they are the gatekeepers, and they are the ones who should also take responsibility on the fact what happens to the people who decide to run or who want to campaign or who want to be featured in the common work for a better world. So including parties and speaking with other parties around Europe, there's great examples of that. But also, just to build on what Mar said, I often love to share this metaphor. I think like, because the technology that we have at hand, I'm not angry and I'm not complaining about the technology. I think digital, the progress we have made has also brought us closer in many ways. But I feel like we are at a turning point, kind of like where we were with cars. If we didn't have seatbelts in the cars, we could drive very recklessly and we could do different things. But the introduction of seatbelts as a safety mechanism to this technology and to the use of this technology is now very common, and it saves lives every day. So I kind of also wanted to add the kind of element of hope and to say that we are working on the big picture, and we are trying to insert those seatbelts into the ways that we interact, because technology can bring so much greatness into our world. And also, when we talk about women in politics, having communities online that can elevate and uplift minority women, disabled women, and women who felt otherwise in the white world and the male white political world would face much more obstacles. They can now connect better with people who can help them and support them. So I also want to see that beauty in the digital feminism that we're talking about today. Thanks.
Super, thank you very much. Is there any other comments? If you don't have any comments, we do have also a video that we would like to share, but yeah, it's a video about the cyber violence that the group is doing. But before that, I see that Axel has, nice that Axel has raised her hand. So Axel, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to thank you for all the presentations. I found them really fascinating, and also to connect these dots together. And I just wanted to touch base on kind of this, the more economic aspect, because I see with Ursula's presentation that it really seems like it does go back to kind of this flexibilization of labor, but also like the fact that the incomes haven't risen and all these different economic factors that mean that actually digitalized platforms have been able to take more space, and as people are looking for extra income and so on and so forth and are less protected. And I was wondering kind of what you think about the impact of these platforms and actually the root cause of why people are gravitating to them, because it seems to me also that we have, due to the economic situation, we don't have as much that social web that we might have relied on in the past to, you know, do the housework, do the gardening, like have that those community-based services. And it was actually interesting because through the pandemic, I feel like we've also realized that we actually need each other and we need to rely on each other. For example, my partner is an English teacher and we babysat for a couple families that were just not doing well through the pandemic and had multiple kids and were, really struggling to work at home, both of them, and to deal with all of these additional responsibilities. So I was wondering if you could, maybe all three of you or just Ursula, say a few words on this kind of phenomenon and why actually these digital platforms are so successful, and we can make them fair, we can, deal with them, but also, do we need them as much as we think we do if we actually fix the root problem?
Shall I come in now? I think you've raised a really, really interesting set of questions, because the pandemic, I think it's a real turning point. It's a turning point in a whole lot of ways, because the trends that I was talking about were obviously, because the research I did was up to 2019. So that was like what was happening before the pandemic. But it was a very, very dynamically changing situation. So the pandemic kind of arrived on something that was already moving. It was like jumping onto an escalator, if you like. And it had very contradictory effects, because in some sectors it kind of like screeched to a halt, slammed on the brakes, like the airline industry, for instance. And maybe it will be good for the planet ultimately, but some industries clearly came screeching to a halt, but others absolutely accelerated. So that growth in online platforms, like delivering stuff, has grown absolutely phenomenally during the pandemic. And so what we've seen has been a increasing, on one level, a polarization of the workforce. I wrote an article back in 2006 about fixed workers and footloose workers. So what we have is one part of the population fixed, stuck at home, isolating in lockdown, teleworking, communicating, using digital technologies to work for employers. Increasingly, it doesn't matter where, it could be across borders, it could be the other side of the world, working from home. And on the other hand, all their physical needs being taken care of by this other group of workers, the footless workers out there on the streets, risking their lives very often, bringing them their food, taking away the waste, also looking after the bodily needs of like hospital workers and care workers, the sectors that can't be shut down, and also food preparation workers. We saw, for instance, in meat packing plants and things, are very, very high rates of COVID. So so you could on one level, you could see the workforce as being polarized into these two groups. But then if you look again, what you see is new commonalities, because both of those groups have been subjected like never before to digital management. The guys out there on the streets are being monitored through GPS and given targets and having their wages. They're digitally tracked every step of the way. The public sector workers in the hospitals and the schools are increasing and are having to work to performance targets. Their work, they're having to use standard protocols. Their work is being monitored like never before. If you're a university lecturer, as I was until 2 months ago, you get student ratings deciding how good your lectures are. You're as effectively monitored as these other guys. And meanwhile, the teleworkers are all being digitally monitored through their webcams, and keystrokes being monitored, and increasingly very sophisticated AI packages that do things like they actually monitor the emotional content. Like there are these software packages now that are used for call center workers that automatically pick up, for instance, when a customer is getting angry, and then the emoticons pop up on the screen and the call center worker is being told, oh, this customer is getting angry, or this customer is happy. And so we're all digitally managed. It's spreading so there is actually a basis for a common platform of demands around digital rights at work, which seems to me something that could unite these very, very diverse groups of workers who historically haven't had much in common at all. But also on the other side, as you so rightly said, Axel, the pandemic has actually shown us visibly how much our physical reality matters, how much the location matters, how you can be working for a platform like Upwork for a client on the other side of the world, but your physical bodily needs have to be met. And we all have bodies, and they have to be protected against viruses, and they have to be fed, and they have to be kept warm, and they have to. And so I think we've been reminded all over again about the physicality of our daily lives, and the focus has come back onto local communities, and it's brought out something I think very positive. I think people right across the world, or certainly around where I live in London, have come together using the digital technologies to communicate, creating WhatsApp groups for their streets and things like that, to check that all the elderly people are okay, to make sure everybody's got food. There's been a new focus on local communities and local organizing. And I think that's something that can be built on in a really positive way. And it's very, very clear that lots of people really don't want to go back to the office. There's a huge resistance to giving up teleworking. Now people have experienced it. Of course, it has downsides, and it has huge downsides for people who are living in toxic household situations. You know, as Annika was saying, you know, the domestic abuse has shot up. But that's, if you like, all the more reason for people to focus on local solutions to local problems, to organize locally for safe houses and for alarm systems and various ways that neighbors can intervene to protect the vulnerable and so on. So I actually think, ironically enough, the pandemic has created a possible basis for a new kind of local politics that could be very, very positive and very green, actually, too. Sorry to speak for so long.
No, it's fantastic. Thank you, Ursula. And I think that with the input from Annika, we're going to finalize. But Annika.
Thanks. Just a very quick word. And I also feel like it was such a great question, because we are in this situation, we're trying to identify what to do and how to get out of this and how to get justice and equality in the digital field. But the question in the back is like, no one really, it was a very small pool of people who started developing these technologies and these companies on the hands of very selected few people. So also in terms of that, having those few selected companies that have shaped and are shaping our realities now, the way we live and the way we're protected, and then coming to the monitoring, the digital monitoring in our everyday lives, I believe that we as feminists should be especially concerned about the racism and the bias built in these technologies. And this is something we absolutely cannot watch happen, and we need to be very vigilant on that, because especially in my other campaign where we work on biometric mass surveillance, this is what we see. We talk mostly about how we're monitored in public spaces, but the technology is the same, whether you're being monitored at work or at the airport or in the market hall, because we know that those technologies are extremely biased and they discriminate against people of color, indigenous people, and also gender diverse people, if you want to look at it from gender perspective. So also remembering to keep that and fight for diversity and inclusion and fight for protection of these technologies, which are used to monitor us, I think is an essential part of the digital feminism that I adhere by, at least. And I hope that this conversation inspires you all to also look into it and find out and get informed. There's many, many great anti-racist organizations who are leading the fight for more equal and non-discriminatory tech, and go out there and support them and endorse them, because they're awesome. And I hope we can continue this conversation with them maybe at the next council.
Thank you. Of course, that was a very nice input, final input. Well, so I think that was a very inspiring session. Yeah, I felt I learned a lot of things. So I hope that you also did. I really enjoy it. So, and as Annika pointed out, I'm sure this is just going to be a first conversation. For sure, we need to pick this topic and bring it further and, you know, strengthen it within the agenda of the European Green Party, and we will do so. So I just want to thank you all for participating, for spending this hour and a half with us. Let's finalize with this video that the Green Group in the European Parliament did about the cyber violence, and if you want, you're also invited to follow the keynote speech of Petra de Sutter. Is going to happen at 4. And then also we still have a nice, awesome plenary that is about climate and biodiversity. So thanks again. Very nice, inspiring fellow women. And the video is on, and have a nice rest of the day. Take care.
T'has de mutar. Ah, perquè tens el soroll posat. Tens el so posat. Vale.
That they think it is only getting worse. This is the new face of an old enemy.
Gender-based cyber violence is not a new phenomenon. It continues the cycle of violence that women, girls, and gender-diverse people face every day in every country in the EU.
Current responses to gender-based violence in the EU are weak, fragmented, and just insufficient.
The EU urgently needs an inclusive and comprehensive directive to prevent and combat gender-based violence in all its forms, online and offline.
We want the European Commission to show the highest determination to end with the gender-based violence, once and for all.
Join us in calling on the European Commission to take concrete legal action and to show their commitment to our human rights are not just empty words.
Thank you. Have a nice rest of the day.
Thank you.
care.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Ciao.
Espera, que ya 14 de